My friends, what we are witnessing today in Haifa is not just a military strike, it is a historical tremor. The city of Haifa, once a symbol of industrial progress and regional commerce, now lies engulfed in flames, shaken by Yemen's newly unveiled Falaq missile. But beyond the smoke, beyond the rubble, lies a far more critical story. A story about power, resistance, and the unraveling of a global order built on decades of inequality and domination. Yemen's Falaq missile has rewritten the rules of asymmetrical warfare in a way the world did not anticipate. When the missile tore through the sky and struck Haifa, it was not merely a display of force, it was a geopolitical message encoded in fire and precision. This was not the act of a superpower, nor a technologically dominant state. It was the move of a nation long marginalized, long underestimated, and long dismissed as incapable of modern military innovation. And yet, in one calculated moment, Yemen demonstrated that power is no longer confined to those with wealth, vast arsenals, or international alliances. It can emerge from resilience, ingenuity, and desperation fused together. The Falaq missile itself symbolizes more than a weapon. It represents the evolution of modern resistance. Under siege, deprived of resources, and enduring years of external intervention, Yemen managed to develop a system capable of reaching one of Israel's most strategic and fortified cities. That reality has shaken military analysts worldwide. How could a nation under constant blockade achieve such technological sophistication? The answer lies in the changing nature of global warfare, where innovation thrives not in luxury, but in necessity. In Yemen's case, necessity became the mother of a new military doctrine, one built not on abundance, but on adaptability. Strategically, the Haifa strike was a revelation. It revealed that traditional deterrence models, the ones the West has relied upon for decades, are eroding. No longer can power be measured purely by GDP, air fleets, or defense budgets. Today, the equation includes the will to innovate under pressure and the ability to weaponize resourcefulness itself. Yemen's move shattered the illusion that smaller states must remain at the mercy of military giants. It exposed how rapidly technology has democratized destruction, putting advanced capabilities into the hands of those once dismissed as powerless. The most haunting takeaway for the global order is this: the monopoly on fear has been broken. The missile did not just travel across borders, it crossed the boundaries of expectation and arrogance. It told the world that the era of unilateral dominance is fading. It forced global powers to confront a chilling new reality that the next major threat may not come from a conventional army, but from a nation that refuses to kneel, a people who turn their survival into strategy. Yemen's Falaq missile did not just strike Haifa, it struck the very heart of global complacency. The moment Haifa was hit by Yemen's Falaq missile, the world's pulse quickened. A single strike transformed a regional conflict into an international alarm, echoing through the halls of power from Washington to Moscow, from Riyadh to Brussels. The attack was not just a blow to Israel's northern stronghold, it was a direct challenge to the perception of invulnerability that has long surrounded one of the Middle East's most heavily defended cities. Within minutes, global media networks erupted with breaking news banners, defense analysts rushed to live broadcasts, and governments convened emergency security meetings. Haifa, once a symbol of industrial resilience and maritime commerce, suddenly stood as the epicenter of global anxiety. The shockwaves were immediate and far-reaching. Financial markets reacted with visible tremors, energy prices spiked, investors fled to safe assets, and speculation grew about the security of Eastern Mediterranean trade routes. Intelligence agencies around the world began dissecting radar footage, satellite images, and missile trajectories, searching for answers to the same haunting question: how did Yemen, a nation under siege, manage to project such power with such precision? The Falaq missile was more than a projectile. It was a geopolitical earthquake, and Haifa was its fault line. Diplomatically, the incident set off a chain reaction of urgency and uncertainty. Western allies of Israel issued statements of solidarity condemning the strike, while regional powers quietly reevaluated their positions. In Arab capitals, the event was viewed with a mix of awe and apprehension, proof that Yemen's military evolution had reached an unprecedented threshold. The attack blurred the boundaries between deterrence and defiance, forcing strategists to admit that the balance of power in the Middle East may be shifting faster than anticipated. The Falaq missile didn't just test Israel's defenses, it tested the credibility of global deterrence itself. What makes this moment even more gripping is the psychological impact. Haifa's residents, accustomed to the hum of industry and commerce, now face the haunting sound of sirens and uncertainty. The sense of vulnerability rippled beyond Israel's borders, reminding both allies and adversaries that no city, no matter how fortified, is immune to modern precision warfare. As images of burning infrastructure and emergency evacuations flooded social media, the world was left with an unsettling realization: the era of distant wars is over. In an interconnected world, a missile launched from a nation once thought powerless can send tremors that shake the entire geopolitical landscape. Haifa's fire became a global mirror reflecting a new age of insecurity. The Falaq missile's impact on Haifa was more than a military act. It was a declaration of resistance written across the night sky. For Yemen, it was a statement of existence, a voice rising from the ruins to announce that it could no longer be ignored or subdued. The strike embodied the defiance of a nation that has endured years of air raids, blockades, and economic strangulation, yet somehow transformed its suffering into strength. The symbolism is powerful. A country branded as broken has just shown that willpower, when pressed to its limits, can become a weapon more formidable than any imported arsenal. This was not simply an act of war. It was the roar of a people reclaiming dignity through defiance. In political and moral terms, the Falaq missile represents the growing revolt against a global hierarchy that has long dictated who has the right to fight back and who must remain silent. Yemen's message was unmistakable: resistance is not a privilege reserved for the powerful. The poorest nations, too, have the capacity to strike back when cornered and abandoned. Across the Middle East and beyond, this act resonated deeply with populations who see their own struggles mirrored in Yemen's endurance. It was a spark of symbolic rebellion, a reminder that modern empires, no matter how advanced, cannot indefinitely suppress the aspirations of the oppressed. What makes this moment especially unsettling for global powers is that the missile's flight path carried a moral payload just as potent as its explosive one. It shattered the illusion that military dominance equals moral authority. For decades, the world has watched as powerful states justified their interventions under the banner of defense, while labeling others' retaliation as aggression. The Falaq missile tore through that double standard, exposing the hypocrisy that has long defined international discourse. Suddenly, the narrative of who is victim and who is aggressor blurred, forcing the world to confront uncomfortable truths about justice and power. The imagery of a Yemeni-built missile reaching Haifa reverberated like a rallying cry for all nations living under external pressure. It was a signal that no blockade can completely suffocate resistance, and no economic sanction can extinguish the human instinct for sovereignty. The Falaq became more than steel and circuitry. It became an emblem of endurance, a symbol that even when crushed, a nation can find the strength to rise, to strike and to demand that the world see it not as a victim, but as a force. The aftermath of Yemen's Falaq missile strike on Haifa has ignited not only military concern, but also a fierce global debate over moral double standards and political hypocrisy. In capitals around the world, officials rushed to condemn the attack, labeling it an unprovoked act of aggression. Yet those same voices remained silent during years of bombardment, famine, and blockade that devastated Yemen's population. The contrast is impossible to ignore. This moment has peeled back the polished rhetoric of international diplomacy to reveal a truth many already suspected. The rules of outrage are written by those in power, and they apply only when convenient. The world watched in real time as justice was filtered through a lens of selective empathy. This event became a mirror reflecting the uncomfortable inconsistencies of global politics. When powerful nations wage war, their actions are described as defense or security operations. But when the weak retaliate, it becomes terrorism. The Falaq missile exposed that double language, and with it, the erosion of credibility in the very institutions meant to uphold international law. The United Nations held emergency meetings, statements were issued, and promises of accountability were made. But beneath the surface, the global audience saw what many have long believed: morality in geopolitics has become transactional. Who condemns whom depends less on the act itself and more on who holds the influence to define it. For many in the global south, this was not just an attack on Israel, it was a reckoning with decades of Western dominance over the narrative of right and wrong. In cafes, universities, and newsrooms across the Arab world, discussions erupted not only about military strategy, but about the deeper meaning of justice. How can the world demand restraint from a nation that has endured ceaseless siege? How can those who impose suffering now act shocked when desperation turns into defiance? The hypocrisy of power has never looked so exposed, so raw, or so unsustainable. What makes this moment so powerful is that it forces a question that global leaders would rather avoid: who decides the moral hierarchy of nations? The Falaq missile may have targeted Haifa, but its true impact landed squarely in the conscience of the world. It shattered the illusion that international law is impartial and reminded us that when justice is unevenly applied, resistance will inevitably rewrite the rules. In the fire over Haifa, the world saw not just destruction, but reflection. The strike on Haifa sent shockwaves far beyond the battlefield, rattling the global economy and unsettling strategic corridors that sustain the modern world. Within hours of the Falaq missile's impact, financial terminals across major cities flickered with red warnings. Oil prices surged, shipping insurers raised premiums, and energy investors scrambled to reassess risk exposure in the eastern Mediterranean. Haifa's port, a crucial artery for trade and industry, was forced to halt several key operations, leaving tankers stranded offshore and supply chains hanging in uncertainty. The reverberations were immediate and profound. This was not just a military strike, it was an economic message written in the language of disruption. The global market's reaction revealed a hard truth about modern warfare. Economic stability is now as fragile as peace itself. A single missile fired from a nation under blockade managed to jolt the same global systems that thrive on the suffering of that very nation. It was a paradox too glaring to ignore. Economists began drawing parallels with the oil crisis of the 1970s, warning that the Haifa incident could ignite a chain reaction across trade routes, insurance markets, and energy supplies. The world, accustomed to predictable patterns of conflict and commerce, suddenly realized that the rules had changed. Permanence was an illusion, and vulnerability could strike from the most unexpected direction. Strategically, the attack exposed the delicate balance of the region's maritime infrastructure. Haifa's port has long been a logistical gateway connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. Any sustained disruption there threatens not only Israel's economy, but also the broader commercial networks of the Mediterranean. Shipping giants began rerouting vessels toward alternative ports, while analysts warned of potential choke points forming in already congested waters. The specter of instability spread like a contagion through global logistics, from energy companies recalculating supply routes to manufacturers fearing shortages in raw materials. Yet, perhaps the most striking aspect of this event is how it underscored the economic hypocrisy of global politics. The same nations profiting from arms sales and conflict management suddenly found themselves vulnerable to the instability they helped perpetuate. The flames in Haifa illuminated a bitter irony. The tools of control have become the instruments of chaos. Yemen's strike didn't just damage a port, it punctured the illusion of a secure global economy. It was a stark reminder that, in an interconnected world, even the smallest spark in a marginalized nation can ignite tremors felt in the boardrooms of New York, London, and Riyadh. The Falaq missiles strike on Haifa stands as a chilling warning to the global community, a signal that the current international order is far more fragile than many would like to believe. It was not merely an act of defiance, it was a symptom of a deeper, spreading instability that grows wherever inequality and injustice are left to fester. The attack revealed how easily suppressed voices can evolve into disruptive power when denied justice for too long. Yemen, a country long written off as broken, just demonstrated that desperation can become strategy and that neglect can breed innovation. This was not an isolated outburst. It was a preview of a world where the marginalized no longer ask for recognition. They demand it through action. Every era has its breaking point, and the Falaq strike may well be a marker of ours. For decades, the global system has operated on the assumption that dominance ensures control, that sanctions, isolation, and force can contain disobedience. Yet the fire over Haifa shattered that illusion. It revealed that technology, access, and intelligence are no longer monopolized by the few. In an age of open networks and shifting alliances, the monopoly of might is fading. A missile built in hardship and launched in defiance has forced the world to confront an unsettling truth. Oppression has consequences, and those consequences now possess range, precision, and impact. The broader message is unmistakable. If inequality remains unaddressed, if global governance continues to serve power instead of justice, the world will see more flashpoints like this, unexpected, asymmetric, and deeply symbolic. The attack on Haifa was a reflection of accumulated frustration, the manifestation of voices that have been silenced for too long. The world's great powers are now faced with a question they can no longer ignore. What happens when those at the bottom stop believing in diplomacy altogether? When the only language left is retaliation, even the most fortified cities become vulnerable. What makes the Falaq strike so haunting is not its immediate damage, but what it forecasts. It hints at a coming era where economic disparity, political arrogance, and moral blindness converge to create a perfect storm of rebellion. The fire that lit up Haifa may fade from the skyline, but the message it carried burns brighter than ever. No empire is permanent, and no oppression sustainable, and no injustice forgotten. The tremor Yemen unleashed was not just physical, it was historical, a warning that the next wave of global transformation may come from those the world least expects. In closing, I urge you to see this not simply as another episode in Middle Eastern conflict, but as a warning to a world that has lost its moral compass. when justice is denied, when inequality becomes systemic, when empathy is replaced by arrogance. Even the smallest nations will rise and the earth itself will tremble. Haifa's fire is a cry for balance, for equity, for humanity. History is shifting before our eyes, my friends, and whether we choose to learn from it or burn with it will define the century ahead.